Sorry about that. I'm going to restart on that whole sentence, okay? Because I had to get on the phone. But all the varying interactions form dynamic systems within systems, which mutually affect one another to produce arrays of possibilities approaching infinity. In the light of such magnitude, one can justifiably despair at ever fully comprehending the dynamics of even the simplest mental function, let alone the more complex wonders of creative human experience. Even with the quantum leaps we have taken in the last decade in our understanding of the human brain, and expecting more to come, there are innumerable ways in which we will remain mysteries to ourselves. Thus, anything I say about how addiction develops in the brain will of necessity be a vast oversimplification. A description of only the most superficial levels of observation. For the rest, as for the stars and galaxies around us, we must experience wonder. And the next section is called Equilibrium and Stress. As a first step toward appreciating how the brain functions in addiction, we need to review the importance of balance and equilibrium in brain activity. The societies and systems of brain cells form a very real ecology in which equilibrium of activity is critically important. All brain functioning, like the rest of bodily activity, depend upon delicate shifts of balance among chemicals, cells, and system of cells. Like human beings, nerve cells can never act in a complete isolation from one another. Their interconnections are so extensive that anything happening anywhere within the nervous system is bound to have effects somewhere else. A change in one cell shifts the balance of its local group in all of its functional systems. These changes, in turn, affect the larger systems of the brain, and these then cause changes in the other systems in the body. The great ecological, there we go, system. I'm sorry, I had a hard time saying it. Ecological system. That is, the person is altered. In truth, we must acknowledge that the reverberation of effects is not limited to an individual human being. As we well know, a change in one person affects other people. The individual affects family and friends. These, in turn, shift the balances of the larger society, and on it goes. Certainly, the activities of one nerve cell in the occipital lobe of your brain will not measurably affect the life of someone on the other side of the world. But it cannot be denied that some reverberation, however minuscule, must happen. Just as the billions of cells in each of our brains form a vast, interconnected community inside of our skulls, so do we human beings, whether we wish to or not, participate in the community that is our Earth, our solar system, our galaxy, and just as vast universal systems depend upon their natural ecological balances, so do the systems of cells within our brains. Both Eastern and Western medical sciences have long understood that maintaining natural balances is the body's greatest priority. If the systems in the body are going to work at all, they must work together in harmony. When equilibrium is thrown off balance, the result is stress. By definition, stress is the body's reaction to disequilibrium. Stress includes both the alarm responses that signal imbalance and the coping mechanisms that seek restoration of equilibrium. Within the nervous system, cells cope with imbalances by means of three basic responses: feedback, um, habituation, and adaptation. These three mechanisms are also the neurological dynamics of attachment. Progressively, like three stair steps descending into slavery, feedback, habituation, and adaptation lead to addiction. The next section is called feedback. I have said that certain results of cells' activity can be fed back to it by other cells, causing it to modify its functioning. Feedback is the first line of defense against stress, the initial reaction to imbalance. Feedback can occur in one of three ways. Cells that are overactive may be inhibited. Cells that are underactive may be stimulated. And cells that are doing well may be facilitated. As an example of inhibitory feedback, let us say I am walking barefoot and I step on a tack. Systems change, stress occurs. Cells in my spinal cord have almost instantly caused a reflex withdrawal of my foot. At the same time, thousands of cells higher up in my spinal cord become very active in response to the sensation of pain. They are sending messages of alarm and stress to functional systems higher up in my brain, demanding response. Unchecked, the alarm messages could imbalance my higher systems, causing me to overreact, to panic, to become crazed over a minor incident. To restore a semblance of equilibrium and to enable an effective response, some of the receiving cells will send inhibiting messages back to the original cells, in essence, telling them to settle down. In this way, the balance of function is kept from being too distorted, and an appropriate response is possible. My higher systems then only have to increase my pulse and respiration temporarily, get me to curse and hop up and down a few times, and help me to pull the tack out of my foot. Although we must remember that millions of cells are involved in any such activity, we can liken the feedback between two individual cells to two people talking together. If the first person is speaking at a normal volume and rate and saying something the second person is very interested in, the listener may give facilitating feedback by saying, "Oh yes, please go on." If the first person is speaking too softly to be heard, the listener will experience a little stress. She may then give some stimulatory feedback. "I can't hear you. Please speak up a little." Or if the first person is very excited, speaking too loudly and rapidly, as the nerve cells were in the last example, the listener may feel quite stressed and need to draw back and say, "Whoa, slow down. Now tell me slowly and quietly." This is inhibitory feedback. The vast majority of feedback that naturally occurs in the brain is inhibitory. The cell systems that initiate activity are, for the most part, in a constant state of readiness and potential activity, so the higher systems of the brain must maintain balance and function primarily by inhibiting them. The cerebral cortex inhibits deeper centers. The right and left sides of the brain mutually inhibit each other. Cells in the brainstem inhibit cells in the spinal cord. Effective action primarily takes place through selective inhibition. There we go. I have often marveled at this arrangement of things. It seems to indicate that human beings, and perhaps all other creatures with brains, are inherently active, dynamic, and vibrant. Maybe it is the nature of sentient life not to have to be stimulated in order to act, but to always be ready to go. It means we are not simply passive responders to external stimuli. In the very essence of our being, we are initiators. Perhaps in the image of our Creator, we ourselves are endless creators. To return to our earlier analogy, the most common relationship between neurons is like the listening person telling the excited person to settle down and speak more slowly. If this inhibitory feedback works, the excited person calms down quickly. The normal balance of the relationship is restored, and effective communication can continue. If the initial feedback is not effective, however, or if it must be given repeatedly, the listener will experience even more stress. Her next option is more aggressive. She can try to force him to shut up. Failing this, she will try to tune him out. In nerve cells, the two responses happen simultaneously. It is as if the listening person both stuffs cotton in her ears and clamps her hands over the speaking person's mouth. In the language of neurology, habituation has begun. Habituation. Habituation can be a misleading term. It does not mean forming a habit. As we shall see, habituation is the neurological cause of tolerance, but technically it refers only to the process by which nerve cells become less sensitive and responsive to repeated stimuli. Habituation can occur in two ways, depending on how long the stress persists. The first kind of habituation occurs when the cells continue to receive repetitive stimuli over a short period of time, perhaps only minutes or hours. The cells actually restrict the transmission of the incoming impulses by inhibiting their own receptors and by actively suppressing the conduction of those impulses by the sending of cells. The receiving cells are no longer simply informing the sending cells of their excessive activity. Now they are using brute force to restrict the conduction of impulses along the axons of the sending cells. We experience such habituation countless times each day. It is what makes us unaware of background noises. When you first go for a walk on an ocean beach, you appreciate the sound of the breaking waves. Since this sound is so repetitive and does not demand any particular response from you, however, you will soon become unaware of it. A long time may go by before you notice it again. This is because the receptors of cells in your auditory system have become less sensitive to that sound, and its conduction along fibers connecting those cells is actively being suppressed. It happens with virtually any system of cells in the brain. When you first enter a building, you notice the smells, sounds, and general atmosphere of the place. After a few minutes pass, you usually become unaware of these things. A number of studies indicate that certain forms of meditation help to decrease automatic habituation, thus enabling one to remain more continually attentive to all that is happening in the present moment. The meditations that work in this way encourage an attitude of relaxed openness, not tense concentration. We use a similar kind of suppression when we are paying attention to or concentrating on one thing and trying to shut out distractions. It is also a way that psychological repression happens, keeping unwanted internal sensations from entering consciousness. It can take a lot of work to suppress the transmission of internal and external stimuli, especially if the unwanted sensations are strong. This is why we become tired after a long period of concentrated attention, and why active psychological repression can sap our energy for other things. because of the effort receiving cells must use to suppress the transmission of unwanted stimuli. They would become exhausted, depleted of neurotransmitters and energy sources if they kept it up for too long. Therefore, a different technique is necessary to handle stimuli that go on for more than a few hours. In this second form of habituation, the nerve cells begin to undergo actual physical changes. They start to destroy their own neuroreceptors and even sever their synaptic connections with the sending cells. The analogy of two people talking becomes absurd at this point. We would have to say that the listening person first punctured her own eardrums and then walked out of the room. So let us drop the analogy for a moment and simply say that full habituation involves actual physical changes in nerve cells and in the connection between them. The physical changes establish a long-lasting system of defense to protect the equilibrium of the larger system. This is the real meaning of habituation. Both feedback and habituation are ways of trying to keep new stimuli from too strongly affecting the normal equilibrium of ongoing systems. Feedback simply communicates a quiet down message. Habituation uses more force to prevent messages from entering the systems it is trying to protect. When neither feedback nor habituation is effective, the repeated messages move in and disturb the natural balance of the systems. Then a new balance must be created. A new normality must be established. This is adaptation. Another word for it is attachment. Adaptation is the next section. It says, if all attempts at habituation have failed, the receiving cells will increase their responsiveness. They will join in rather than trying to tune out. As a result, the normal interaction among cells is thrown out of balance. Once again, the process produces stress. If this imbalance lasts only a short time, the old equilibrium can be quickly restored when the situation passes. But if the change is prolonged, the rest of the system must adapt to it. Countless systems of cells must adjust their functioning to accommodate the new situation. When adaptation is complete, stress goes away because a new equilibrium has been established. With this new equilibrium comes a new sense of normality. A mild example of change in normality is adjusting to different time zones. If I take a brief trip to the other side of the continent, the time there will feel unusual and a bit stressful to me. I will probably try to hold on to my old sense of time until I return home to my normal time zone. But if I spend more than a few days there, I will have to adapt to it. If I do not, the stress of trying to hold on to my old rhythms will become too great. When I adapt, the new time zone will become normal for me, and my old time zone, when I return, will seem unusual. With each change, I experience stress when my old normality is altered, relief when the new normality is established. Adaptations occur through physical changes in the cells of the nervous system. Synapses formed and dissolved, connections established and broken, neurotransmitters changed in kind and amount, neuroreceptors altered in numbers and responsiveness. Adapting to change, then, means going through the stress of withdrawal from the old normality and finding relief when a new normality is established. At this most basic level of human functioning, attachment has made its appearance. I am attached to whatever makes things normal for me. I don't let that normality change without a struggle. We human beings are the most adaptable creatures in God's creation. Our adaptability has allowed us to dominate the world, but our very capacity to create new normalities for ourselves also makes us vulnerable to countless attachments. As every attachment forms, a new normality is born. With each new normality, addiction exists. The next section is nerve cells and attachment. With some understanding of feedback, habituation, and adaptation, we can proceed to examine how attachment actually happens to brain cells, how the brain becomes addicted. In a hypothetical example, we will focus on a single synapse, between two individual cells. It is important to remember that this focus on one synapse and two cells is vast oversimplification at the outset. The events I will portray are actually determined by hundreds of thousands of cells and millions of synapses, including so many variables that the full sequence could never be fully described. Let us say that the synapse in figure 4.4, which I will show y'all, is located deep in your medulla, just above your spinal cord. It is part of a functional system that helps govern your level of alertness and wakefulness. The body of cell A is located in your frontal lobe, and it sends its axon a distance of about 6 inches down to your medulla, where it forms the synapse with cell B. Cell A's primary function is to stimulate cell B whenever you need more alertness. I'm so sorry, y'all. It's a mouthful. Oh my goodness. Okay. To do this, cell A releases neurotransmitter chemicals that it has manufactured in its vesicles. Some neurotransmitters cross the synaptic cleft to join with cell B's neuroreceptors, stimulating cell B to send its own messages along to other cells. Soon you wake up and pay more attention to things. When it is time to sleep, cell A quiets down and transmits less, and cell B, receiving less, also settles down. All the changes are kept within a balance and rhythm to which all the cells in this great system have become accustomed. It is normal. Then suppose that one day you become upset over something, perhaps an unexpected bill or a threatened relationship. Your general level of agitation rises higher than normal. Cell A sends more signals all day long, and it keeps on sending them after bedtime. You have trouble getting to sleep. While dutifully relaying wake-up signals, cell B also sends inhibitory feedback to cell A, trying to get it to slow down. Sooner or later, the feedback will combine with fatigue, and cell A will get the message. If you have relaxed as much as possible and allowed this process to take place naturally, sleep will come. A normal equilibrium will have been reestablished. At the turn of the century, before people knew much about how nerve cells worked, Professor Edwin Starbuck understood the natural balances of the brain. Let one do all in one's power, he said, and one's nervous system will do the rest. But let us say you choose to handle your insomnia in a more unnatural way by taking a sleeping pill. The sedative interferes with cell A's ability to send its transmitter chemical to cell B. Cell B, noticing a less than normal amount of chemical, sends stimulatory feedback, trying to get cell A to become more active. Cell A may answer weakly by releasing a little more neurotransmitter, but the sedative prevents it from fully responding. The sedative has overwhelmed the normal process. Feedback has not helped, and sleep comes. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show the. I'm going to leave this up there for a little bit. And you can pause the screen if you want to get a closer look at this. Okay.